Kimmel opened with his typical sardonic grin, immediately launching into what seemed like harmless banter. "Harrison, great to have you back. You know, I was watching some of your old interviews, and I noticed you always look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Is that just your face? Or do you actually hate doing press?" Ford's expression remained stoic, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Jimmy, some of us prefer to let our work speak for itself rather than constantly seeking attention." The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if they'd witnessed a friendly jab or something more pointed. Kimmel's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with forced brightness. "Right. Well, speaking of work, let's talk about your new film. Though I have to ask, and don't take this the wrong way, but aren't you getting a little old for action movies? I mean, Tom Cruise is still doing his own stunts, but he's what, 15 years younger than you?" Ford leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Age is just a number, Jimmy. Experience and authenticity matter more than youthful desperation for relevance." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Kimmel's writers had clearly prepared material designed to poke fun at Ford's age and reputation for being difficult in interviews. But Ford wasn't playing along. Instead, he was deflecting each attempt with surgical precision, turning the comedian's own weapons against him. "You know what I find interesting, Harrison?" Kimmel continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "You've built this whole persona around being the reluctant star, the guy who doesn't want to be here. But then you show up to every premiere, every talk show. Seems a bit hypocritical, doesn't it?" Ford's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I fulfill my professional obligations, Jimmy. That's what professionals do. They honor their commitments even when they're surrounded by people who mistake mockery for wit." The audience was dead silent now. What had started as typical late-night television was transforming into something much more uncomfortable. Kimmel, realizing he was losing control of the interview, decided to escalate rather than retreat. "Oh, come on, Harrison. Don't be so sensitive. This is comedy. You can't take everything so seriously. Maybe that's why people say you're difficult to work with. Maybe that's why some directors prefer working with actors who actually want to be there." Ford's eyes flashed with something dangerous. He sat, forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a measured, controlled tone that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You want to talk about being difficult, Jimmy? Let's talk about professionalism. Let's talk about treating guests with basic respect instead of using them as punching bags for cheap laughs." The host, perhaps sensing he'd crossed a line but too proud to back down, pressed forward. "Hey, I'm just doing my job here. If you can't handle a little ribbing, maybe late-night television isn't for you. This isn't exactly Barbara Walters." "Your job," Ford replied, his voice carrying decades of authority, "is supposed to be entertaining your audience, not humiliating your guests. There's a difference between wit and cruelty, though I suspect you've never learned it." Kimmel's face was reddening now, his carefully constructed persona beginning to crack. The comedian who built his career on finding humor in everything was discovering that some targets fight back. "Listen, Harrison, I don't know what crawled up your ass tonight, but this is my show. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't need some movie star lecturing me about comedy." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Ford stood slowly, his movement deliberate and commanding. The entire studio held its breath as the legendary actor looked down at the host with something approaching contempt. 20 years of what, exactly?" Ford's question cut through the studio like a blade. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hum of cameras still rolling and capturing every second of this unprecedented television moment. Kimmel, clearly rattled by the actor's commanding presence, tried to regain his footing with nervous laughter. 20 years of entertaining millions of people, Harrison. Maybe you've heard of ratings, awards, actual success in television?" Ford's expression remained unchanged, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. I've heard of those things, yes. I've also heard of integrity. Tell me, Jimmy, when you go home at night, are you proud of what you've built here? Making jokes about people's, appearances, their struggles, their personal lives. Is that what you call entertainment? The camera operators were frantically adjusting their shots, recognizing they were witnessing television history. This wasn't the controlled chaos of a planned bit or the manufactured drama of reality TV. This was real, raw, and completely unscripted. Kimmel's trademark smirk was nowhere to be found now. Look, if you don't like the format, no one forced you to come on the show. You signed up for this when you agreed to be here. I signed up to promote my work and have a professional conversation, Ford replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had commanded respect on film sets for decades. I didn't sign up to be your verbal punching bag so you could get a few cheap laughs from people who mistake cruelty for comedy. The audience was completely silent now, some visibly uncomfortable in their seats. This wasn't the fun, light-hearted entertainment they'd expected when they'd lined up hours earlier for tickets. They were witnessing something much more serious, much more real. Kimmel, perhaps realizing the gravity of the situation but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on his aggression. You know what, Harrison? You're being incredibly unprofessional right now. My audience came here to be entertained, not to watch you throw a tantrum because you can't take a joke. Ford took a step closer to the desk, his presence filling the small space between host and guest. Unprofessional? Let me tell you about unprofessional, Jimmy. Unprofessional is ambushing a guest with personal attacks disguised as humor. Unprofessional is using your platform to tear people down instead of building them up. Unprofessional is what you've been doing for the past 10 minutes. The host's face was flushed now, beads of sweat visible under the studio lights. I'm the host here, not you. I set the tone, I ask the questions, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Is that what you think hosting is? Ford asked, his voice rising slightly for the first time. Bullying people who come here as your guests? Using your position of power to humiliate others for entertainment? You're not a host, Jimmy. You're a predator. The word hung in the air like an explosion. Gasps could be heard from the audience, and crew members exchanged shocked glances. This was beyond anything that had ever happened on late-night television. Kimmel shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking completely. How dare you come on my show and call me names? You arrogant has-been. You think because you were in a few movies decades ago that gives you the right to lecture me? Ford's eyes blazed with controlled fury. A few movies? I've spent 50 years in this business, and in all that time, I've never encountered someone so eager to tear others down, to build themselves up. You want to know what's truly pathetic? A man in his 50s who still gets his kicks from playground bullying. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Security personnel could be seen moving nervously at the edges of the stage, unsure whether to intervene. The show's producers were frantically communicating through headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this historic moment play out. Get out, Kimmel snarled, pointing toward the exit. Get out of my studio right now. Ford didn't move. Instead, he turned slowly to face the audience, his weathered face carrying the dignity of someone who had faced down far more intimidating opponents than a petulant talk show host. The cameras, still rolling, captured every nuance of his expression as he addressed the stunned crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you've seen what happens when someone mistakes a platform for a weapon. His voice carried across the silent studio with perfect clarity, each word measured and deliberate. Kimmel, realizing that Ford was now controlling the narrative, frantically gestured to his producers. Cut to commercial! Cut to commercial right! Now! But the cameras kept rolling, and Ford continued his impromptu address to the audience. You deserve better than this, Ford said, his gaze sweeping across the rows of shocked faces. You deserve hosts who elevate their guests, who create moments of genuine connection and joy. What you've witnessed tonight is not comedy. It's not entertainment. It's a man so insecure in his own abilities that he can only feel successful by making others feel small. The audience sat transfixed, many nodding in agreement. Some were pulling out their phones, recording this unprecedented moment when a Hollywood legend took control of a live television show to deliver a masterclass in dignity and professionalism. Kimmel, his face now purple with rage, stormed around, his desk toward Ford. "This is my show. You don't get to lecture my audience." But his outburst only served to prove Ford's point more dramatically. Ford turned back to face the host, completely unintimidated by Kimmel's aggressive posture. "Your show? These people aren't your possessions, Jimmy. They're human beings who trusted you with their time and attention. Look at them. Look at their faces. Do they seem entertained by your behavior?" The camera operators, recognizing the historic nature of what they were capturing, continued filming despite the increasingly frantic signals from the control booth. This was the kind of raw, unfiltered television that would be dissected and discussed for years to come. "I've worked with some of the greatest directors in Hollywood," Ford continued, his voice never wavering. "I've learned from masters of their craft who understood that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. You could learn from that if you weren't so busy being impressed with your own cruelty." Kimmel was practically vibrating. With fury now, his carefully crafted television persona completely shattered. "You think you're so much better than everyone else? You think your little movies make you some kind of saint? You're just another washed-up actor desperate for attention." The desperate nature of Kimmel's attack was evident to everyone in the studio. He was grasping for anything that might hurt Ford, but the veteran actor remained completely composed, which only made the host look more unhinged by comparison. "Desperate for attention?" Ford repeated, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Jimmy, I'm 78 years old. I've had more success than most people dream of. I don't need attention. But you're so hungry for it that you'll sacrifice your guest's dignity for a cheap laugh. That's not confidence, that's desperation." The studio audience was completely under Ford's spell now. Many were openly applauding his words, creating an even more humiliating situation for Kimmel, who was losing control of his own show in real time. Security guards had moved closer to the stage, unsure of their role in this unprecedented situation. Should they escort Ford out as their boss demanded, or allow this historic television moment to continue? Their hesitation spoke volumes about where their sympathies lay. "You want me to leave?" Ford asked, his voice carrying a finality that silenced even Kimmel's sputtering protests. "Fine. But before I go, let me leave you with something to think about. In 50 years of this business, I've learned that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals who you really are. Tonight, Jimmy, you've shown everyone exactly who you are." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Ford straightened his jacket with deliberate care, every movement radiating the quiet dignity that had made him a screen legend. The studio remained frozen in stunned silence, hundreds of witnesses to what would become the most talked-about moment in late-night television history. Kimmel, his face contorted with rage and embarrassment, made one last desperate attempt to salvage his authority. "Good, leave. Nobody wants you here anyway. You're a relic from a bygone era." But his voice cracked on the last words, betraying the panic beneath his bluster. Ford paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time. His eyes swept across the audience, many of whom were now openly applauding his stance. "Ladies and gentlemen, remember this moment. Remember that you have the power to demand better. You deserve entertainment that doesn't come at the expense of human dignity." With that, he began walking toward the exit, each step measured and purposeful. The audience erupted into sustained applause, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation that grew louder with each passing second. The sound echoed through the studio like thunder, drowning out Kimmel's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. "Sit down! This is still my show. Kimmel screamed, but his words were lost in the cacophony of approval for Ford's dignity. In the face of his host's unprofessional behavior, camera operators continued filming, capturing the unprecedented scene of a talk show audience rejecting their host in favor of the guest he had tried to humiliate. Ford reached the studio exit and turned back one last time, offering a slight nod to the cheering crowd. Then he was gone, leaving behind a shell-shocked host and an audience that had witnessed something extraordinary. The applause continued for nearly 2 full minutes after Ford's departure, a sustained rejection of everything Kimmel represented. In the chaos that followed, producers frantically tried to restore order. The show cut to an unscheduled commercial break, but the damage was already done. Social media exploded within minutes as audience members posted videos and commentary about what they had just witnessed. The hashtag #JudgeFordVsKimmel began trending immediately, with overwhelming support for the veteran actor's dignified stand. Behind the scenes, the aftermath was swift and brutal. Kimmel, still shaking with rage and humiliation, retreated to his dressing room as his staff dealt with the crisis. The network executives were already fielding calls from reporters, advertisers, and other celebrities who had witnessed the meltdown. Live on television. Within hours, the full confrontation had been uploaded to multiple social media platforms, despite the network's attempts at damage control. The video went viral instantly, garnering millions of views, and sparking a widespread conversation about respect, professionalism, and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of Ford. Fellow actors, directors, and industry professionals took to social media to praise his handling of the situation. Many shared their own stories of uncomfortable experiences on talk shows, creating a broader discussion about the culture of humiliation that often passed for entertainment. Kimmel's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as viewers rejected his brand of confrontational comedy. Advertisers began pulling their support, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. The incident became a cautionary tale about the importance of treating guests with respect and the consequences of abusing one's position of power. For Harrison Ford, the confrontation only enhanced his reputation as a man of integrity and principle. He never publicly commented on the incident beyond a brief statement thanking fans for their support and reiterating his belief in treating all people with dignity and respect. The entertainment industry took notice, with many talk show hosts quietly adjusting their approaches to guest interviews. The Ford incident, as it came to be known, marked a turning point in late-night television, reminding everyone involved that true entertainment should never come at the expense of basic human decency.